Welcome to Business Ninjas, brought to you by WriteForMe, where you'll hear from business leaders who are out there growing their business and slaying it every day. Learn from the masters. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of Business Ninjas. This is your host Kelsey here today with Michael Smolens. He's the founder and chairman at DotSub. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So Michael, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I live in New York. I've lived here for about 50 years, and DotSub was my ninth startup.
Wow.
I had the first eight were all over the world in high-risk emerging economies, employing thousands of people, including Haiti for 20 years, in
Wow.
Mexico, first America, and in Hungary, then Romania, then India, Pakistan, and Turkey, and then Azerbaijan and Egypt.
Holy
So
cow.
I had a very, very broad global life all over the world. And so I gained a perspective, and that's what my background is. And then the idea about DotSub occurred to me in 2004 when I saw the movie Fahrenheit 9/11, Michael Moore's movie that was about the Bush Gore election. And
Mm-hmm.
at the theater, I came up with the aha moment. And I said, wow, here is a documentary film in English,
Yep.
potentially could change a US presidential election.
Mm-hmm.
What if I could create a browser-based platform that would enable any video or any film in any language to be easily, quickly, and inexpensively made available in any other language?
Mm-hmm.
That could potentially change the world.
Mm-hmm.
That was a thought I had in 2004. And fast forward over the next 3 years, we got some developers, we created the platform, and in 2007, we launched the very first browser-based tool to
Wow.
enable video created in one language to be available in any other language. And it was with either a network of professional translators or with community or crowd translators, or ultimately we would partner with or develop our own AI or machine
Mm-hmm.
translation. And so, depending on what the client's budget is and what
Mm-hmm.
their speed of delivery was,
Mm-hmm.
we aim to do all of those things. So, that's sort of the concept of how DotSub started.
So, talk to me a little bit about the platform because it sounds to me like back in 2007, you were pioneering this journey that I imagine there weren't very many platforms that
Oh, it
had.
was it was a number of years before YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just very naive and hopeful in everything. And because I had spent almost 40 years around the world,
Mm-hmm.
I was very aware of the desperation of 8 billion people in the world to
Mm-hmm.
have access to knowledge in their native language, which they
Mm-hmm.
didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought about the ways to figure it out. And video is obviously the best way for storytelling because all of us know the phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I always say if a picture is worth 1,000 words, how many words is a video worth? There's 28.6 frames per second. And then the question becomes, how do you create video? And most people hire professional cameraman and everything else, which is very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And this was long before YouTube and long before smartphones,
Mm-hmm.
portable cameras. And I just didn't know what would happen, but I was hoping that sometime in the future, technology would step in and solve that problem.
So, who exactly would reach out to you to utilize this platform? Is it producers? Is it individuals who want to help translate? Talk to me a little bit about the platform and who would reach out to you.
Well, who would reach out to me? In the beginning, we reached out to people because people didn't know about the platform.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started it, I very consciously made a decision not to raise any outside capital,
Okay.
because I wasn't interested in a traditional thing and maximizing, revenue. I wanted to have something that was
Mm-hmm.
very big global impact. So
Mm-hmm.
we created a platform that is evolving to this day and the first one of the things we did is we have no offices anywhere. So
Okay.
we have employees in 12 countries, and we have several thousand freelance professional translators all over the world, but we don't have any offices anywhere. So when people decide that they want to translate their storytelling, their videos,
Mm-hmm.
they can choose to use professionals, or if they have people, they could use a community or crowd, or we're evolving with more and more relationships with machine and AI.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine regarding your revenue that you may be a cheaper assistance to a lot of the other compared to a lot of the other platforms.
Well, cheaper, I don't like that word. Cheaper has negative connotations.
That is true.
And so, depending on what people's budget is
Mm-hmm.
and what their desire is for quality versus
Mm-hmm.
price,
Mm-hmm.
and that is always a very interesting discussion
Mm-hmm.
because lots of people are saying that professional translation in the translation industry
Mm-hmm.
is a 50 plus billion-dollar industry,
Wow.
of which a very small portion of that is video. Most of it is word or text based,
Mm-hmm.
but that is growing very, very rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody says in a couple of years, there won't be any need for professional translation.
Mm-hmm.
Everything will
Wow.
be done by machine. And that's
Mm-hmm.
not at all true. So,
No.
no.
Talk to
And
me a little bit about that.
well, one of our major customers is IBM,
Mm-hmm.
and IBM created the very first AI engine called Watson. It
Okay.
was before Bing and before Google Translate.
Mm-hmm.
And IBM has been a really valuable client of ours for almost 10 years now. And
Wow.
we do all of their CEO and executive speeches with professional translators in official languages.
Okay.
So, and if Watson was good enough, they would use their own engine to do their translation. But the CEO speech has a lot of nuance and
Mm-hmm.
detail, and they want to make sure that what they're saying is very well understood in all of the languages.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's not a black or white, it's a very, very subtle situation with translation. And
Yeah.
if you're in a taxi cab or in a restaurant and you're ordering food and you're having casual conversation, machine or AI translation certainly is good enough, and it's
Mm-hmm.
all getting better. But
Mm-hmm.
depending on what you're trying to do, there's different levels of quality.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine at a level such as that, it's important to make sure that the dialects align, that you're using, the right tone for the audience. Like you said, it's different than just being in a coffee shop than, one of the president of IBM giving a speech.
And it depends on what people's outcome is and
Mm-hmm.
intention is, and we're doing more and more in terms of interpreting in terms of real time because
Mm-hmm.
everyone, today we're on Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
you could have 25 people and filling your screen 5 by 5 on a Zoom call, and they could speak 6 native languages. And so some people might want to have real time interpreting
Yep.
so that you could see what is being said on the screen in their native language.
Mm-hmm.
And then also you could have real time translation of interpreting real time. And we're one of the very first to do that. So
Okay.
the market is changing very, very rapidly, and we're working to change with that.
Mm-hmm.
Part of my vision when I started DotSub, because I had spent over 30 years all over the world, was Mr. Nelson Mandela from South Africa
Mm-hmm.
came up with a saying, which basically was the mantra for me. And it says, when you speak to a man in a language he understands, you speak to his head.
Mm-hmm.
When you speak to him in his native language, you speak to his heart.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody that truly wants to make an impression and give an emotional connection to what they're trying to say or communicate wants to speak to people's hearts.
Mm-hmm.
But so they need to speak to them in the native language. And unfortunately, many American companies think that everyone in the world either speaks or understands English,
Mm-hmm.
so they don't need to spend the time or money to translate it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take a look at the statistics, out of about 8 billion people in the world, only 6% speak English as a native language. Another
Wow.
25 to 30% speak English as a second, third, or fourth language.
Okay.
So they have a very good understanding of what's being said. But then once again, when you get down to the nuance, it's a matter of how important companies and people think
Mm-hmm.
cross-cultural communication is.
Mm-hmm.
And we could spend a whole amount of time talking about that subject on its own. But at the end of the day, it's very, very important to get your messages out
Mm-hmm.
to people in the right form. And
Mm-hmm.
storytelling, which is used in video, is by far the best way
Mm-hmm.
to get your messages out. So the use of video is exploding all over everything that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. So I imagine, how did COVID affect DotSub?
Well, more people were not going to movies. They weren't
Mm-hmm.
going out and they were staying in. And so people were communicating, like there was a lot of conferences.
Mm-hmm.
There were tens of thousands of people at major conferences.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, those conferences stopped overnight.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to figure out how to communicate their messages. And a lot of them started making videos of the speakers that would have been at the events. And then they wanted to have them in multiple languages. So it changed. So
Mm-hmm.
all of these things are about communication.
Mm-hmm.
They're all very, very important. And so that's what it's doing. And now it's very slowly coming back to before COVID, but it's certainly not all the way back. But technology is continuing to increase and march on.
Mm-hmm. Talk to me a little bit about what the platform looks like. So if someone were to access the platform, talk me through what it would look like to them.
Well, they're going on to the platform, and the people that use the platform can be community people or
Mm-hmm.
professionals.
Mm-hmm.
They have, when you have a video and then you have to time code it and caption it in the source language. If the video is in French, it has to be time coded in French.
Mm-hmm.
You can do direct translation, but it's
Okay.
much more complex because then you have to do the time coding and the translation. So
Right.
once you have a video and someone captions it or time codes it in the source language, then someone else can look at the video and the text is rendered on the screen in the language and then they can type in
Mm-hmm.
the text in that other language, and then that translated text shows up on the video on whatever device ultimately is shown. So you can see the video, and then, like on the bottom of YouTube, many people aren't even aware of it. You can have a video and then you can choose the language and look at the language. So there are many different ways that many people aren't aware of that.
So to generate revenue, do you charge per video?
It's per language,
Per
video
language.
minute.
Okay.
The professional translators get paid by the minute depending
Okay.
on the language. And some languages are much more difficult and expensive than other languages. So depending on the language, so a 20-minute video is twice as expensive as a 10-minute video.
Mm-hmm. What would be an example of one of those, more difficult languages, do you think, to translate?
Japanese is the
Okay.
most expensive, and then remote languages around the world are
Okay.
more difficult because they have fewer professional translators.
Mm-hmm.
And so depending on, if you have community or crowd, because there's a lot of organizations that have thousands or tens of thousands of passionate people
Mm-hmm.
that want to volunteer their time
Mm-hmm.
to translate the messages of Nelson Mandela or
Mm-hmm.
Mahatma Gandhi into
Mm-hmm.
other languages. So all of these things are all part of the overall ethos of
Mm-hmm.
communication in multiple languages. But just to there's 8,000 languages in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and about 85% of them are non-written languages. They're,
Wow.
they're indigenous languages.
I did not know that.
And those languages are disappearing very rapidly as indigenous tribes, the tribal leaders are dying and whatever. And so all of these things are, very, very difficult
Mm-hmm.
to do in terms of the globe. English is the dominant
Mm-hmm.
language in the world, and then other languages have, more people speaking and more people are doing this, but technology is changing very rapidly, and DotSub is really trying to be a leader
Mm-hmm.
in terms of doing these kinds of things to help companies and organizations
Mm-hmm.
who are communicating their message in video form
Mm-hmm.
to make it available so everyone can see it and understand it.
So how have you been able to, educate prospective customers and reach them to talk about what DotSub does?
Well, we do trade shows, we do marketing, we do
Mm-hmm.
brochures, we do mailings,
Mm-hmm.
and that to get people to know about us. And it's just something, word of mouth and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's how we do that.
So if one of our listeners wanted to access DotSub's, social media channels, what would be the most, beneficial one for them to take a look at that in your opinion has been, the most accessible
Well,
for?
we really are not focusing on social media and being accessible for social communication because people aren't they're not paying for that. There's no
Mhm.
commercial need for that.
Okay.
So, I mean, YouTube, so that's really a difficult thing.
Okay. Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. So what would be one thing that you would want our listeners to understand about either DotSub or the industry that you're in?
It's a rapidly growing industry. It's extremely important to everyone in the world to have access to knowledge. And anybody that wants to get their message out to people all over the world
Mm-hmm.
should be spending the time and effort and a little bit of money to make it available so people can see it in their native language.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, that what makes them a customer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to Nelson Mandela's, quote, being able to speak to someone's heart, and the mantra of DotSub.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And the industry is rapidly growing, and DotSub is a leader, and it's something that would be very glad to speak to anybody about this.
That's amazing. So it looks like you've got a pretty interesting poster behind you. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Oh, that's the Sustainable Development Goals list from the United Nations. And this was created in 2015 by the then Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon. And he actually added and changed from what was done in 2000 by the Secretary General then. It was created the Millennial Development Goals, which was 15 goals for 170 countries, just the underdeveloped countries.
Mm-hmm.
This is for all of the countries. There's 17 goals,
Mm-hmm.
and the number 17 is partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is to impact all 8 billion people.
Mm-hmm.
Goals are health, gender, climate, water, energy, education, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so many large investment companies, when they're investing money, require that the investments are working on certain things that are going to be helping the world.
Mm-hmm.
The other three letters that are extremely important that there's been no chart is about ESG, environmental, social, and governance.
Mm-hmm.
So it is estimated, and Europe, unfortunately or fortunately, is about 10 times as far along as the US is
Mm-hmm.
in terms of requiring these things to go on. So when a very large firm is investing money, they're wanting to know that the money is being spent to do good in the world, or
Mm-hmm.
it's very difficult to measure change that's being done in these kinds of things because they're not really very tangible. And
Mm-hmm.
so, once again, storytelling and using video is an important way to get one's message across.
Yeah, I was just about to ask how, how you pull the SDGs into your work at DotSub, and it makes sense about, the storytelling. So I think that's a great connection.
Mhm.
Very nice. So, Michael, one last question before we head out. What would be one thing, both personally and professionally, you hope to be celebrating in this next year?
That's a very good question and a tough question. Um, I hope to be celebrating. In the last couple of days, we've seen that Ukraine is apparently moving very aggressively
Mm-hmm.
in their battle. So I would
Mm-hmm.
love to see that war over and settled the way it is.
Yeah.
And I would like to see a continuation of the climate, but in the world right now with forest fires and rivers, and they're very, very dangerous and difficult. So I would love to see an acceptance and awareness across society
Mm-hmm.
that the SDGs and the ESG things are extremely important to
Mm-hmm.
the world.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, your grandchildren aren't going to have a world to live in and enjoy. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very possible to do this because it's not just about making profit.
Mm-hmm.
That would be what I would hope to see.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, Michael, this has been a really powerful, conversation that we've had about storytelling and, the SDGs and how you have accompanied those into DotSub's mantra, the threading of the business that makes up DotSub. So I appreciate you taking the time to be on Business Ninjas. Again, Michael Smolens, he's the founder and chairman of DotSub. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much, Kelsey. Bye bye.